even on the more spadier systems, once you have a loch or a series of lakes, lochs, that helps to retain water, and it slows down the runoff. A good example would be, for example, Screep. Yeah, a lot of small, we could even call them lochs, where the river basically widens, but it retains water, and that would be a textbook example.
Hello and welcome to the Ireland on the Fly podcast about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland. With all this rain the last while, I'm sure many of you are still itching to get out fishing, and for this week's episode we've got some great insights and advice on where to fish for those early season salmon along the Atlantic seaboard from Markus Muller. When the rains do finally subside and the waters come back into contention, Markus pinpoints some of the most likely places where you have a high chance of landing a salmon. Plus, he also has some interesting points about the 2022 season and trends to look out for over the coming years, so do stay tuned. Tom, before we hear from Markus, I thought it was a very interesting point he was saying about pinpointing and highlighting and utilising those fisheries that have the locks on them. And it's more relevant than ever before now with all this rainfall we're having.
Yeah, good man, Dara. Hi. Yeah, very, very relevant. I mean, and I was just thinking there, like, how things can change so much. Like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago when we had Mike O'Shea on, it was the exact opposite. But now with all this rain that we're having, it's, any fishery that has a lock in it, it's a bit of a boon for chances of catching a salmon. Because I know we were talking there, you were thinking of doing a bit of fishing this weekend coming. And I just, I said to you, you'll probably be fishing in fields.
Yeah. Well, I was looking at the level. So like the last few days, it had dropped. Right, it was kind of down to around the 1 meter mark, and you're kind of thinking, right, we have a chance if it gets down to 0.8, maybe. we've a chance to get out.
This is the Blackwater.
The Blackwater, yeah. Sorry, the Blackwater.
Yeah.
And then I just checked it there earlier today, and it shot up to over 2.
Oh,
wow. Like it's just you're thinking, right, it looks like it's going to ease, and then boom, it's doubled. Like
2 is way too high, I presume.
Oh, it's even like when it was over, it was 1.2 last week. You wouldn't have done it like now.
Not a hope then.
Not a hope, like so. I'm
and this is like what you were saying. This is where like having a lock or something gets you a chance to get fishing. Where it kind of acts like it is a reservoir. Right.
Yeah.
And it will hold water and release water accordingly. So you always have constant flow coming in. So whereas when it's a straight river, it can run off completely and just go to nothing.
It's a
torrent. But another thing as well, below a river as well, if you just have a straight river and you get a flood, the water tends to become very dirty.
Yes.
But if you have a lock on the system, the lock actually kind of cleans. Like the really dirty water that comes into the lock is at the head of it.
Yeah.
And the bit that's coming off the end is still cleaner water. So there's always a chance that you can fish below a loch as well for that bit longer in flood water before it gets really solid, as we'd say in Irish, really dirty.
And as Markus points out, like he pinpoints those kind of fisheries on the western seaboard that, do have locks in the system that pretty much, you time it right, the rains come, but then you can get onto it, quick enough afterwards, although I'd love to see how they're all doing nowadays with this, the rainfall we've had.
Oh, I mean, it's shot. Yeah. I mean, like we've in the last, I think the lake here with me in the last, since Paddy's days, probably gone up 25 centimeters, nearly a foot. But it was interesting, just back to what Markus says. I mean, we're talking there about the western seaboard and your chances of salmon. I mean, for your earlier fish, you are looking at locks. And then as they come on, as the season progresses, then the rivers definitely come into play more, they definitely come into play.
Something I learned, I have to say, from it. And Markus gives us good information in terms of ones to target. Next week, you're hopefully, are you fishing competition, Tom? So we'll hear how you go.
I fished one on Sunday, and we'll move swiftly along. And anything else to discuss?
The rugby?
Didn't fit. I fished the commercial out of Galway, and it's a tough day. Yeah, I was actually fishing with Darren Maguire, who was on last year. We had a great day out. Darren, there was captain of the winning Irish team up in Melbourne.
How did Darren do?
Yeah, so look, we had a great day. Darren was unlucky. I didn't even say that I was unlucky. I just had no luck at all. Darren had a few chances, they didn't stick. But it was a tough day. The temperature was about 5 or 6 degrees. It rained constantly. And I think think 30 rods or something out, and only 6 rods of fish. So it was just fish very tough, very, very tough. But that's the way it goes. That's it. We had a good day out, bit of crack. Enjoyed it.
I'd say Darren was very quiet, didn't have much to say,
No,
just
he
kept
didn't.
himself to himself. Darren, if you're listening, your episode's still one of the most popular, so we have to get you on again. Well, I tell you what.
And by the way, back to you,
Oh.
you're still now. I was waiting for this picture of the Springer on the snow. That's gone.
Yeah, that's
There's
gone.
going to be Springer on it.
I'll be in a raft on the river at this stage. Like, I'm seriously, I'm actually getting now like cabin fever. I feel like it's winter time. You know what I mean? Like, at least in the winter time, I could go out bloody pike fishing. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't that much rain. Like now, like the last few weeks, I've been like, I'm making plans. I've got the work out of the way. I go, right, I'm going to go fishing. And then it's like, for Jesus sake. And I don't tie flies. So what the hell else? So no, actually, I think it was George McGrath was saying it last week. Find some of the smaller rivers, tributaries.
Yeah, true, actually. Well, and come here, Irish lesson from last week. What is a tributary in Irish?
Tribidoch.
No, it's a prefix on the word river. So
I
Owen is river.
Owen.
Oh, Owen.
Owen Ian.
Well, that's good. That's good. No, Fo Owen is tributary.
Oh, okay. I did learn something else from you, but we weren't recording at the time.
What was that again? Oh, we're not recording now either. Wait.
We are.
We are. Oh, I think I remember. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Imagine.
moving swiftly along.
Let's hear from Markus now, before we confuse people anymore. And I first asked him if he'd managed to get out fishing yet this year as well.
Unfortunately not. Water levels weren't that suitable, and then time constraints. And I actually haven't wetted a line this season so far. I don't know about you guys. I know you, Tom, I think you've been out a good few times probably on carp and so, but I personally, my boat, when I look out the window here now, it's still ashore tight, and I haven't been out at all, but hopefully that'll change shortly.
What's the lake there beside you?
Carramore Lake, yeah.
Okay.
So I live probably just 150 yards from it, so I can see the fish rise from my kitchen window, which is not a bad thing. And I think we will be talking about Carramore and some other fisheries during that session here, anyways.
We spoke to Brian Hope a couple of weeks ago. We did a fishery focus on Carramore. The amount of interest, I think, since then.
The response to it was huge.
We're just, I have to go, have to fish.
So have you, well, Tom, you probably have, but have you fished it before?
I fished it only once.
Right.
And that's only 20 years ago. Dara?
Okay.
No,
You were
never.
saying?
And
wow.
after the Brian injury,
Wow.
me and half the country now want to go down and fish. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
increased traffic near you, Markus, my apologies.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I can see that. Now, funny enough, I mean, it's right beside my doorstep, and it's probably with most these things that are near to you that you may take for granted. I find when I came here as a tourist in the old days, I did a lot more fishing locally than I actually do now, and it's funny now. I'm really keen. I want to get somewhere to get some grayling fishing, so I travel abroad. And when I was living abroad, it was like, oh my God, I want to go to Ireland to fish for salmon. So it's funny sometimes how these things go.
Faraway hills are greener and all that, like, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely. But okay, so just a quick recap on the 2022 salmon season. I'm not sure if you're aware, about 5 days ago, the status of Irish salmon fish stocks 2022 with catch advice for 2023, that document was actually published, and it's available on our corporate website, fisheriesireland.ie. And it basically, it's a scientific document, but I would recommend it for everyone who is interested, who fishes for salmon, or not necessarily salmon alone, everyone who has an interest in the aquatic environment and salmon stocks. It's there's a lot of interesting information there, good graphs, tables, and it basically outlines the recommendations from the technical expert group on salmon for the 2023, the kind of catch advice. So, and that's publicly available from our website.
So is that fisheriesireland.ie? Is it?
That's fisheriesireland.ie, and when you click on publications, it's actually at the moment it's the first document that pops up.
Oh yes, I see it there now. Yeah.
So
look, do you want to take us through maybe what?
Well, but briefly, we can just because it is a bit technical, and again, if everyone who wants to go into this in a little bit more detail, I'd say download it, and there's interesting stuff there. So, but when we just look back at what has been recommended based on the 2022 findings by the expert group is that we have 48 rivers with a harvestable surplus. That means that they exceed their conservation limits. So those rivers are open, and then we have a further 20 rivers that are actually below their conservation limit, but achieve at least 65% of their conservation limit. And these rivers are open under catch and release, which leaves about 50% of the other rivers being closed. So we have a total of 144 salmon rivers or classified salmon rivers. So it's about 50%. And that may sound like, oh my God, there's 50% closed, but we have to bear in mind that most of those rivers that are closed, we have very little data. They are very small systems. They are not really, from a fisheries perspective, they wouldn't be as important as the kind of well-known rivers there. So,
can I ask you just on that, Markus? Sorry, can I say of the 50%? Do we know, has that number gone up or down in kind of recent years or the last
good
decade?
question. And again, there is when you look at the document there and on, say, do you have it open there yourself?
Yeah, I have it here. Yeah.
If we scroll on page 8, for example, and there is a table there, or a graph.
Yeah.
And again, we don't need to go into big figures here, but just when you look at this, when this started in 2007, which coincides, of course, with the cessation of the drift net fishery around Ireland, that this started this approach, this kind of catchment-wide approach, to look at each individual river catchment. And the red bar there, which indicates the closed rivers, this was well over 100. And over time, now we are at about probably 50%. So the overall number of closed rivers has gone down. Now, I think that's a good sign. You have to look at the green and the yellow column there. And I think we have to look at this combined, because they are the rivers that are open for fishing. Some are catch and release, some you have a surplus. So if you combine those two and you look, it has been fairly stable there over the years. When you just compare the advice for 2023 and last year 2022, there's actually more rivers open for fishing because the number of catch and release rivers has increased. And when we go back to probably 2017, it's kind of for the last 5-6 years, the number is kind of steady there, with, say, 2012 was probably the best year in terms of rivers being open. There was just over 60 rivers closed. But the last 5-6 years, when you look at the columns there yourselves, it's more or less steady.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing. But the overall trend, when we look at, say, counter figures and marine survival, there is definitely a downward trend in salmon numbers and catch numbers as well. Now, again, we have to differentiate between catch and actual run. Now, when we look at last year in particular, because you asked me about last year. Now, as you remember, last year we had this incredible drought there during the summer months, and that definitely impacted on the actual catch of the one sea winter fish, the grills. So angling effort was high enough, was actually higher than the previous year, 2021. That was because of restrictions, coverage restrictions still in place in 2021, but actually there was less fish caught. So it will be interesting this year now, if we do experience similar droughts again or similar issues again. But I think last year was, from that perspective, as far as the grills fishing was concerned, difficult to put it into perspective because of that drought.
But do you not think on that, Markus, like we're going to see nothing, like summer drought conditions are here to stay and they're probably going to get worse. So therefore, what we've seen last year is surely going to be consistent, if not an increasing trend over in the future. Like, what do you think of that?
Yeah, well, very difficult. I mean, there's definitely something happening. We'll see it. The interesting thing is the overall amount of rainfall stays more or less the same. It's just the distribution. More compacted. Yeah. We actually see more freak events, more flash floods, and we see more prolonged drought events as well. Now, if this is continuing in the future, well, who knows? There's different models, out there, and even scientists aren't 100% sure. But I think what we have seen so far, leads to the assumption that we probably will be facing more such droughts, particularly during the summer months, and that will definitely impact on our salmon stocks and also then, as a consequence, on the fishing. Now, talking about the western seaboard here, and the vast majority of our rivers here are spade rivers that really depend on rainfall, that only really fish, that only get really a run when there is sufficient water. And by nature, their flow regime is characterized by very steep amplitudes, but then water levels drop also very fast. In general, they are very spatey and they tend to have flash floods. And when you look at kind of climate change issues now, and also not just climate change, but also land use, drainage, for example, all that will impact, and the big problem is the retention capacity of those river systems, and that is alarming without doubt.
And actually, there's a couple of other questions I just wanted to come off the back of the stats from that, and I'm going to put the link in the episode notes so if people are wondering, just so people can have a look at it directly. Of the 50% of rivers that are closed, do you know, are they mainly on the eastern side? Like, is there a predominant kind of geographic location?
Not necessarily. I mean, as I said, most of the rivers that are closed, we don't actually have enough robust data. For example, there is no fish counters on those, on most of them. And also the rod catch data is very limited. There's rivers there where we don't have, probably have less than 10 fish reported caught. And that's one of the reasons why these systems are closed. When you look at the actual document there, when I go through the list of closed rivers here, for example, you can scroll further down on that, but it's also in the angling regulations. They're not necessarily all on the east coast or the south. There's actually quite a number of rivers in the northwestern RBD that are closed. There's a few in Kerry, but as I said, they are mainly smaller systems where there's basically a lack of data, and who wouldn't be, from an angling perspective, not as important as the main rivers.
Okay, and there's just one other follow-on I just wanted to ask you, Markus, is you were saying the angling numbers, are we seeing a pickup or a decline from pre-COVID times of visiting anglers?
Oh, definitely. I mean, 2022, we saw an increase of visiting anglers again, because 2020 and 2021, it was very difficult for visiting anglers to actually set foot here in Ireland. There was only a short time window there, and even when this happened, they may have made their own or alternative arrangements and went somewhere else for fishing. So we definitely see an increase. I don't have exact figures at hand, but from say the Moy fishery here in Ballina, we definitely have more anglers. We had more anglers fishing in 2022 than in 2021, and hopefully that trend will increase further.
How is it with pre-COVID figures?
Is it reverted back to normal?
Well, the question is what is normal, because there's fierce competition out there. You see people, and particularly because of COVID, when visiting anglers are not able to fish, they may make alternative arrangements. And I know personally from a few people I know who couldn't come to Ireland, and they said, okay, look, they booked holidays in Norway or in Sweden where they were able to travel. And if they had a good experience, they may go again. I'm not saying that these guys are lost, but we have to work hard to gain this back. That's
well, isn't it also the case, Markus, as well? Like, it's just the world is so much smaller now.
Exactly.
You can catch a Ryanair flight to Iceland.
Yeah.
You
like, I remember 15, 20 years ago, Iceland was like the last frontier nearly, like,
It was
now, yeah, exactly. Now you can just go for a weekend to Iceland, like, isn't it? So
this is it.
We are in competition with these areas. Like.
We were always in competition, and then don't underestimate what 2 years of restrictions can mean. It's interesting now. So but we shouldn't also forget that Ireland has always been popular amongst continental anglers from Germany, France, and that there is a solid base there. We have a lot of return visitors. You're in the guiding business there, Tom. I think you see that as well, that you have a lot of regulars coming, and that's one of our strengths, really.
Do you have any breakdown of the numbers of visiting anglers that come? What percentage are coming for salmon, brown trout?
Very difficult, because the only figure that we really have is the sale of salmon licenses, which doesn't really, I think, it's an indication, but very difficult to actually quantify the percentages. So it's tricky. It's tricky because there could be fly anglers who come over, but they don't buy a license. They just fish for trout, so we won't see them at all in our figures, But going back to the salmon rivers here, and you said, is there a trend? Is there more rivers close on the eastern seaboard or the southern or the western? When we look at the say some of the counter figures, which are also depicted here in this document, and if you may go to page 38, and that's a very interesting graph here, and it lists all the fish counters that are used to establish these recommendations, and it's interesting to see that, for example, the River Feel stands out, because when you look at it there, definitely there was quite a number of fish more than the previous year. Carramore stands out as well, but then some of the others are well below the previous year. And on the right-hand side, you see where last year's figures stand in comparison to the mean figures. So all this is very helpful information, and I think in a way Ireland is probably leading the way there in salmon management, I think, because I'm not aware of any other European country that would look at this at such a scale, river by river. And I think it's the only way we can manage our salmon stocks in a sustainable way. And we probably have to think about, applying more catch and release the next few years.
And what about, Markus, and it's fascinating seeing these stats and the graphs, and it can be a double-edged sword in many respects, because if you've got such measurements and management of the data, black and white, there it is. If the numbers are going down, you can't hide it, and that's what it is. What about hatcheries? We spoke to Mike O'Shea from the Upper Carra fishery recently, and he made a very good point in terms of kind of introducing the hatchery before it was kind of you were too late. So using it as a supplemental, and he also said how 30% of the catch was from the hatchery. So it's not like it became a predominant strain that took over the fishery. And it really kind of set my mind thinking in terms of, is this something that needs to be embraced more, not as a kind of like we said, a dominant strain taking over the fishery, but the warning flags are here. We know the numbers are going down. Well, look, catch and release is one issue. Sustainable management of the stocks, land use, all that kind of stuff. We all know that. But what's the kind of, I suppose, stance on hatcheries and when and where they could be introduced to help nature? Yeah,
you see, there's pros and cons, definitely. When you look at some fisheries, like, for example, Borishul, where you probably, the fishery is only open because there is ranching going on, and there's, you could call it hatchery. There's two sides of the coin there. You see, there's the approach where preferably you want to have a kind of a self-sustaining population, and you don't want to interfere. It's very difficult what approach to take. But even when you look at Borishul there, or I think Delphi is ranching as well, it's not a straightforward answer, and some countries go down the route and do hatchery programs. Iceland has been successful in some river systems, but they had also some failures. So, yeah. Black box, tricky one, difficult one. And
I do appreciate, look, every fishery, every system is different, has its own needs and wants. So, but it just really opened an eye for me, and I'm not,
it's definitely worth considering. But as I said, there's different approaches. Some catchments are more suitable, some mightn't be that suitable. And, we just have to see, but the overall trend is alarming. And when we are talking about sea surface temperature increase, droughts, more flash floods, you see, if we just produce more fish in hatcheries, that see where I'm coming from. It's these factors that are probably more dominating than what we can do here in our freshwater catchment. You see, water quality, in general, water quality is okay, definitely in most salmonid catchments along the West Coast. And land use practices have changed and have improved, less overgrazing. Forestry is taking a different approach over the years. So all these things we can really control very well, but we really cannot really control what's happening at sea. And that's why that kind of research that's happening at sea is also important.
Funny, you mentioned there, Markus, sea surface temperatures. What's the story with that? Or
I don't have exact figures at hand, but we definitely see an increase in sea surface temperatures, definitely in the areas in the feeding ground area. So it's and all these factors come together. And as I said, there's probably a lot of things that are not within our control. We can just assure that from a habitat point of view, and from a water quality point of view, and from a catchment management point of view, we'll have things in order,
It's actually just as the ocean temperatures, and I must try and pull that out. There was a slide I saw Ken Whelan when he was giving a talk a couple of years ago, and he takes it from the 70s, and you just see it getting redder and redder. And we're talking the Atlantic Ocean and Ireland. Like we're not, and you think you're looking at the Mediterranean nearly, like the way it's going red. Like
it's interesting. It's like any problem we're talking about, like there are multiple factors, but it's just like you will hear from anglers, and I say this solely from anglers and non-scientific, but just from anglers, they're saying, they would say, hatcheries are a factor that we can control. So, I'm just saying that at the moment, that you will hear from a lot of salmon anglers that, there should be more hatcheries. But it's not that simple, or is it?
No, it's not that simple. This is it. That's what I just said, So it's never monocausal. And you may think this is a great idea, and you do things, and then you find out, oh my God, we should have put more thought into this or more research. So what I'm saying, it's a very complex system, and we need to try to manage it in the most sustainable way. And when I'm saying approach more catch and release, for example, I know that some local clubs here in the West, they are thinking of introducing a kind of a size limit, of, I think something is discussed like everything over 65 centimeters. Now we're talking about salmon here, to be released. And while there is a daily allowable catch of 3 fish during the summer months, some fisheries may have decided to go down to 2, and we are also discussing this year on our own state fishery, the Moy fishery, that we will probably introduce a 2 fish limit for this year. So, but again, as I said, it's never monocausal. There's so many factors at sea, freshwater, the wider catchment, angling pressure. It's a challenge. And when we just take that document here, which again is well, there's a summary, but there's a lot more science behind this, and there's complicated models, and the scientists do their best to come up with the good solution, for both sides, So conservation on the one side, but also, we still want to see some angling tourism here, but we definitely have to look at a sustainable way.
And I think as well, it's up to us as anglers as well to educate ourselves.
100%.
To read these kind of documents. I found myself now getting drawn more and more into issues of climate change and the environment, especially as it relates to the oceans. I think it's an absolutely incredible. Like you look at the UN High Seas Treaty Agreement that they came to. It's delving under the kind of the bonnet there and really kind of educating ourselves about it. I didn't even know there was just speaking of stuff that's outside of your control. It was on the Salmon Fishing Forum website, and there was a link to an article. I think it was Belfast Live or something had it. Basically showing these, I don't know if you've seen them, they're called death trawlers, and they're like basically the biggest factory ships in the world.
Yeah.
And that they can hoover up, it's the equivalent of 6 football pitches that they hoover up in the middle of the ocean, all the catch. They were off the southwest of Ireland last week. They've made their way up the western coast, and now I think they're off the northwest coast of Ireland. These are the biggest ships in the world. And like somebody was pointing out in the forum, if you're not telling me that they're hoovering up salmon, sea trout, whatever, in terms of species, and this stuff is going on out there, like, and the sheer scale. I'd recommend people just look it up, like the shit that they're called death trawlers, Death Stars, because they're killing machines. So there is so much going on outside of our own waters, but like you said, it's what we can do, within our kind of freshwater landscape. But I just wanted to ask you, Markus, so overall 2022, before we move on to 2023, characterize it as a kind of a
it was an interesting year because it was post-COVID, then the drought. So overall, I can just, from my own experience, it was one of my worst years salmon fishing. Now, but that was also due to the fact that I didn't get out much. So I landed only 1 fish, and that probably reflects it. Now I know that the spring fishing was okay for some, while the grill season was, because of the drought, more difficult. So it'll be interesting what this year will bring in terms of the spring fishing. Again, like I mentioned, Carramore Lake here earlier. So renowned spring fishery, usually fishes very well during April and May, depending on the weather and the water conditions. Hey, I mean, I'm keeping optimistic. I hope for a good year, 2023. But so far, it's been a slow start. I mean, you've probably followed our catch reports here, our angling update.
Yeah.
There have been a few fish caught. Just, I think, last week, the first fish was reported from the Moy, which it wasn't super late. It's usually, end of February, early March when the first fish is reported. It's never really a very early fishery. There has been a couple from Delphi, from Karan, the Drowse. I mean, the usual suspects in terms of spring fish. So I think it's the next, probably April, May will tell us more about how the spring season will go.
So should we really be keeping an eye then, and for anglers looking, to maybe plan a few trips? And we're going to focus kind of on the Western seaboard anyway here, Markus. Like, where should anglers be looking to kind of maybe put their eye on for the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, well, definitely the few spring fisheries, such as Beltra, will open shortly. That provides nice loch style fishing. As I said, Carramore, renowned spring salmon fishery, but also the Moy. I mean, that the middle section does produce a few early fish, and then there's a couple of smaller spade systems that do get an early run. Delphi would come to mind. Some of the other fisheries are more grills fisheries, like here my own home rivers, so the Owen Moor, for example, or the Easkey. Then if you go further down, all the Connemara fisheries there. But it's probably those two, Lost, Beltra and Carramore, that would be the main spring fisheries along the western seaboard.
You mentioned the Owen Moor there and the Easkey. Are they worth a rattle for spring fish?
The Easkey definitely not. Easkey gets a very usually a late run. It's a small system. It's similar to some of the other smaller spade systems that have a separate catchment. Basically, there's a few more here along the northwest coast. Glenamoy would be another one. Can be excellent in a flood during the end of the season, but really not early season. Not. I mean, we're talking about March, April now. I mean, from May, June onwards, definitely if there is a flood, but not that early. I mean, when I say spring fisheries, I'm talking about from now on, basically for the next 1.5-2 months. Now, there's the Owen Duff that does get an early run, but again, it's a spade river, so fishing is confined to flood events. These would be my recommendations. Also, I mean, on some of the systems, availability of day tickets might be an issue, whereas on Beltra, for example, it's relatively easy to get a boat. You still have to book it, but you'll get on it there.
And the Owen Moor, is that worth?
In a flood, you could give it a go, but from my own experience, and I'm fishing the Owen Moor since 1987.
Right.
So I've never caught a fish before May.
All right.
So it is more a grills and an end of season river, without doubt.
Right.
And the Delphi as well, if you can get on it, isn't it? It's always worth early
season.
Yeah,
I mentioned Delphi before. I mean, definitely. If you get, that's what I meant. Most of you see, because I mean, good spring fishing is scarce enough, and usually the good weeks are booked out well in advance. But if you get on it, always worth a shot. And again, with Delphi, and there's some other systems here, like even the Bundraws. When you think about it, it's again, that brings me to the catchment and the hydrology, where you have retention. You have better fishing, where you have lakes in the system. You have floods last longer. Like in Delphi, you have the outflowing river, Bandura River. You have the lake behind Melbourne. You have Drowse. You have Melbourne behind. So again, with spade river fishing, it's you're often too late. There's rivers here, and I mentioned the Glenamoy earlier. Could be like a matter of hours where you could have the fishing of your lifetime and drawing a blank. That's my experience.
It's kind of great if you live beside it.
Yeah.
But if you have to travel, So I get exactly what you mean. Lovely if you live beside it, but you wouldn't plan 2 weeks in advance.
Well, this
for
is
an
it.
early season. Yeah,
this is it, and we're getting now. I also come from the promotion marketing side. Now my background is in quantitative hydrology and morphology, but most of my work now is with regard to promotion marketing of angling, and you get queries. I mean, I would never really recommend to build a holiday just around a spade river on its own, because you need to have fallbacks, and because you cannot just hope that it's raining, and particularly when it's a family holiday. I've seen many family trips there. So some people are praying for rain and others don't, and it's always it's nice when it happens. That's what my advice is always, if you have a spade river close by, definitely when it's raining, it's a fallback, because say for example the Moy could be in flood and couldn't be fishable. Now we're talking from a fly angler's perspective here solely. And then if you have these fallbacks like the Eski down the road, or even other spadier systems that they can save a holiday. It has happened to me. It has happened to me in years back in Mongolia, for example. We went all the way to Mongolia. You save so much money. You make this trip of your lifetime. You want to catch these famous taimen and lennox. And then you arrive there after 2.5 days of travel and nicked luggage at Moscow airport, etc., etc.
I think there's an episode in that, but
there is.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
You see, the thing is, you arrive there, and basically, then you realize, the main river you want to fish is 3 meters above normal. Rain season has kicked in too early. But then, there was a small kind of spring-fed stream about 2 hours drive away, but we availed of it, and it saved the trip. So it's always important when you plan your trip to kind of have fallbacks.
And from what you're saying, what I'm getting from it is, Markus, that kind of those kind of systems with lock there, that a lake, that'll just kind of, that's what you really need, isn't it, to kind of help mitigate.
It definitely helps. I mean, there's some catchments who don't have lochs in the system, but even on the more spadier systems, once you have a loch or a series of lakes, lochs, that helps to retain water, and it slows down the runoff. A good example would be, for example, Screep, where you have a lot of small, we could even call them lochs, where the river basically widens, but it retains water, and that would be a textbook example, whereas then neighboring catchment, for example, you don't have a single lake, the floods won't last long, and it spikes incredibly fast, but also it drops so fast.
Drops really quickly.
And then again, I can't stress this more often, their land use and catchment management comes into play, and there's a lot that can be done. For example, forestry used to, draining steep slopes and didn't allow for any silt traps as well. So that has changed now, and there's different approaches to this, and riparian zone management, so which helps to retain water, but it will be a thing to watch out in the future, definitely, because if we don't get the water at the time when we need it, that's a problem. And then in the winter, because as I said earlier, overall, we have the same amount of precipitation, annual precipitation. It's just a distribution. And while we are lacking it in the summer and it leads to droughts, in wintertime, it can have really detrimental effects as well, because particularly imagine just after spawning, when you have a huge event there scouring out the river bottom and everything. So it's not easy to compensate all this.
Yeah, I was just thinking of loch there, and it got me thinking, because we didn't discuss it at all. There's generally very little problems with water. And the Galway, the weir, and just for people there, is the Galway weir worth a shot in April?
Now, as far as I know, I think the first fish was caught there recently. I think my colleague Kevin mentioned something. I think you had Kevin there on your show there not too long ago.
Yeah, we did actually.
Yeah. Now, again, it's not a typical spring fishery. Saying that, I think you probably have a better chance there than you would have on some of the other spade systems. But again, the peak of the fishing there is the summer months.
It's more your grills.
You know, when you look down from the bridge, and in good years when the water is clear and low, you can see back after back after back.
Yeah.
So, and this is when you could sell probably 10 times the amount of day permits, you know. Yeah. So, but look, I mean, same on our own fishery here in Ballina, for example. I mean, don't forget, fishing is free there until the first salmon has been caught on the ridge pool, and then up to April. But look, angling effort, if you're not out there, nothing is caught. So I mean, definitely worth a try. If there's a nice day, I mean, why not give it a go? But there's definitely fisheries out there that have a better potential to catch a springer.
Just actually, it's interesting, and just what has come up there is the locks are ones that really you should probably be looking at. You mentioned there Carramore, probably Beltra. Well, Delphi. Well, there's the river in Delphi as well, but the Finloch as well. But they start for spring fishing on the western seaboard. You kind of are looking at them as much as anywhere else.
Yeah, I would say it's those lochs or lakes that would come to mind. Again, if you go a bit further north, of course you have the Drowse. But the rest is summer grills fishing. And then even September fishing, you know, and I mentioned some of the other smaller systems. You would be surprised sometimes when you get a flood late in the season, the amount of fresh fish that do run some of these systems, and they are generally bigger fish than the grills. So there's a few systems that can have a surprise for the angler if the conditions are right in September.
Well, I tell you what, Marcus, we might get you on to preview the back end. If you're up for that, like, because in fairness, it's the one thing I've found, like, especially down in Tipperary, you know, whether it's the Shore or the Blackwater, it's, you know, there's not much of a run back end now. You're kind of thinking, so I might tap your brains for more information later in the year.
By any means.
Definitely. And also as well, definitely want to hear a bit more about Mongolia.
Well, look,
you kept that one.
Said, I like my fishing travels. I've fished a few exotic places, so anytime. Yeah.
And I suppose like and I always kind of take that quote from David McAvoy in the Delphi in terms of best chance of a kind of a spring salmon on the Atlantic is probably the western seaboard. Anywhere else, like, so, you know, people bear that in mind as a unique selling point. You know what I mean? We're talking about pushing and selling it. Like, it's, you've as good an opportunity here in these kind of places, these fisheries that you've mentioned, Marcus. So
definitely.
Get out
and again, I mean, I think we mentioned it before at the last show. The fish is just one aspect. Of course, anglers want to catch fish, but a big selling point is also this fish for wild fish in wild places, the surroundings. And that's what we hear from so many people who come here to Ireland, and they come to fish, but they really appreciate the package, the experience, the friendliness of the people, the crack, the whole Irish, if you want to call it, the whole Irish experience. And that's, I think, one of our biggest selling points. Not just for the continental market, also the US market. The US market has huge potential, and there we are dealing with, I would say, 99.9% well-educated, sustainably fishing catch and release anglers, you know. So we shouldn't forget that.
Yeah, absolutely. Marcus, thank you very much for joining us. Again, a mine of information. I'm going to put the link to that document as well for people to have a look at it. Like we've said, there's loads of data, there's loads of information there. You know, we need to kind of read up on it ourselves and educate ourselves about it. And so we'll have you on again later in the year. And thanks a million for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. I thank you guys, and wishing you all tight lines, and maybe our paths will cross on Carrow Moor at some stage.
Never know. Really good to talk to you again, Markus. Yeah, and tight lines for you for 2023.
Okay, cheers.
Our thanks to Markus Muller for joining us on the show. And don't forget to rate, review, and follow the Ireland on the Fly podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Plus, you can keep up to date on IrelandOnTheFly.com as well as on Instagram, and myself and Tom will be back with another episode about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland.